Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Watchlist. Basically, think of this as a monthly TV guide of me letting you know what and when stuff that I'm interested in and maybe you're interested in as well is coming out. Like always, you can look in the description down below. I'll include any links to any trailers that may be available to anything that I bring up during this watch list. First up, on July 10th, we have the series premiere of The Outpost on the CW. Obviously, if you live outside of the US, check your local listings for channel and time, obviously. But it's a new fantasy series. There's not that many trailers out. From what I'm mostly seeing online is like anything between 30 seconds to a minute. So it gets somewhat of an idea about what it's about. Basically, it's about this girl who lost her parents when she was super young, and she's growing up, and basically she's trained herself to basically track down the person, and she's going to this specific town called the Outpost where she's trying to track them down and get revenge. It seems like aesthetically it's got this medieval look to it. Like, I think the thing I can best compare it to is something like the Shannara Chronicles. If you're familiar with it in any type of way, it's got that medieval fantasy type of appeal to it. The main protagonist, she does have something a little bit more to her, is at least what I've read. Obviously what that exactly entails, I won't say too much about what I've read, but even what I've read wasn't a lot, but still I won't say anything. But there is something special about her, obviously, typically what happens with protagonists in stories of this nature. It seems very interesting, especially if you're looking for something more on the fantasy type of side of things, which I am a huge fan. Like, if you don't know about me, I think I've mentioned this many times in the past, but I'm a big fan of fantasy and supernatural stuff. So next up, on July 20th, which there's a few things coming out on July 20th, we have Killjoys season 4 premiering on Sci-Fi. If you're unfamiliar with Killjoys, it's this kind of wild ride of like a it's almost like a science fictional bounty hunter show. It's just kind of like a lot of space travel, going from places. Like, Killjoys are kind of like bounty hunters in this sense. And obviously I'm very interested to see where they're picking up the story, because obviously after season 3, like, obviously this won't mean a lot to you if you haven't watched the show or you're not caught up, but the battle against the Hullen has escalated, turned into full-blown war, and I'm very interested to see where that takes us in season 4. The last thing we saw was the whole situation about Dutch and Anila, kind of finding out more about them. But the last time we saw them pop up with like a certain other character. Try not to go too much into spoilers, but that was kind of like the last shot of season 3. Plus there's the whole Davin, Johnny, and Delsea situation, which is kind of a thing on its own, which I'm very interested to see what that Delsea thing turns into. Like I said, I'm not trying to go into spoilers, but what happens to Delsea in season 3, I'm very interested in what that means, especially because it heavily affects it affects Johnny, especially considering how he feels about Delsea, but also heavily impacts Davin. So I'm very interested to see like what that all turns into, because we did get introduced to what I guess could be arguably like the main antagonist of Killjoys. I mean, we never met her, but we kind of learn about her a little bit more, and I guess we'll probably get a full-on introduction to her this season, I'd assume. At the very least, finally get to see her physically, I would assume. So I'm very interested to see what Killjoys is about. Like, if you've not checked out the show, I highly recommend you do. It's a very good, funny, awesome, action-packed, entertaining show. So also on July 20th, also on Sci-Fi itself, is the season 3 premiere of Wynonna Earp. If you don't know what Wynonna Earp is, basically it's like this girl who has a demon-killing gun, essentially, and she's from the great granddaughter of Wyatt Earp, the great lawman, and she puts down monsters and demons, and basically that's overall kind of giving you a little tiny synopsis of basically. But I'm very interested to see where things take us in this season, because kind of much like Killjoys, we're going to get to meet our main antagonist, I assume you could call him. Kind of got introduced to him a little bit more last season in season 2, but I'm interested to kind of get more with him in season 3. Another character returned last season too, so that was kind of interesting. I'm curious to see what the team goes to, especially because obviously Wynonna kind of had to give something up, obviously to avoid spoilers, but a certain thing Wynonna had to give up, and see what that turns into this season. Also, she met someone literally at the end of the season. She went to go talk to someone, and that particular person, like, they're part of playing this story, especially because like they have to be neck deep in all of this. So what they have to say about everything, I'm curious to see what their role is going to be. I'm also curious to see about Waverly, because obviously this season's probably going to build a lot on Waverly too, especially because she learned a lot more about herself last season. Just everything she kind of went through last season. Will we see any more Black Badge? Because Black Badge went super silent last season and what that necessarily would that make any impact. Will they ever pop back up in the show or not? They all doing their own thing. Like what's going on with that? What about Dolls? What about Doc? A lot going into the season. I'm curious about seeing what happens. If you haven't checked out Wynonna Earp, now's kind of a great time considering season 3 is right around the corner. Plus, I'm pretty sure they recently added season 2 on Netflix, so you can watch both season 1 and season 2. So kind of catch up before season 3 pops up. It's a very good show. And then finally, also on July 20th, we have the season 2 premiere of Outcast on Cinemax, which only applies in the US. Why I say that? Because if you don't know the whole situation with Outcast, basically season 2 came out last year, like more than a year ago, internationally, but it never actually aired here in the US. So we're finally getting season 2 like super late, but it's happening. If you've never checked out Outcast, basically it's about this dude who basically has the power to kind of exorcise him. It's almost got like this exorcist aesthetic. It's kind of how I always describe it. It's kind of the easiest thing to kind of compare it to, but it's got this like nice like horror, eerie, dark like vibe and feel to it. It's a very interesting show, and I'm glad to finally have season 2. I've avoided watching anything, like even when season 2 originally came out last year, like I avoided watching anything, reading up anything about it. Like I've just been waiting for it to air in the US. So I'm very interested to kind of see where the story takes us this season. If you don't, I think I might have brought this up originally when I talked about it, but it's like, if you're unfamiliar, this is actually one of the people behind the comic book that this is actually based on is Robert Kirkman, same dude who did the Walking Dead comic book. That's kind of a little tidbit information. So it's a very great show, and I'm very excited to finally have season 2. And then on July 25th on Hulu, we have the series premiere of Castle Rock. If you're unfamiliar, it's something I'm not that familiar with, but it is basically it's an adaptation of one of Stephen King's books. Essentially, it's kind of like this town that's kind of like, oh yeah, like a lot of bad stuff happens in this town, and the question is it because God's kind of turned his back on this town because everyone's committed some sin in some shape or form? Is it like, oh, people do evil things in this town, but is it just the people or is it the town itself? And a lot of people believe it being the town. So it's kind of like this evil town that kind of causes the crazy and dark side of people to kind of come out. Caught my surprise with the fact is, like, when I was reading about it a tiny bit, I'd seen the word multiverse, Stephen King's multiverse, which I didn't know a lot of his stuff took place in the same universe. Because I do know there's like, they referenced the prison Shawshank in it. I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. Because a lot of my experience with Stephen King is usually through adaptations. I've never actually read any of his books, but I've watched adaptations like both It movies, like the original It with Tim Curry, and obviously the most recent version with Bill Skarsgård, The Stand, The Langoliers, The Mist, both the movie and the TV show. Haven, which even Haven's like loosely based off the Colorado Kid which he wrote. So that's kind of my experience with this. So I'm very interested to see what it's all about. Like I said, just kind of, I think the trailers kind of did a nice job setting the tone for the show, being like, oh yeah, it's just like crazy town, and obviously a lot of people have a lot of dark secrets. So I'm very interested to kind of see what that ends up being all about, as someone once again who's never read the book that it's based on or any Stephen King book. And that brings this month's watch list to an end. Like always, if you know there's something coming out that you're interested in that you think maybe me or someone else might be interested in that maybe I wasn't aware of, let us know in the comments down below like what that said thing is. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.